The perfect grief, the Soulmate sat dark and silent in the Bahamas anchorage. No lights, no movement, no Lynette. 46 feet of luxury sailboat, completely still on flat water. While somewhere out in the darkness, a retired Marine named Brian Hooker claimed he was fighting for his life. That is the story he told rescuers. That is the story he told Lynette's family. That is the story he nearly got away with. Brian's version goes like this. He and Lynette left their anchored yacht in a small dinghy. The weather turned violent. Lynette fell into the water. He tried to save her. He failed. He drifted alone for 9 agonizing hours with a single oar, helpless against the currents, until he washed ashore at Marsh Harbor. It is a heartbreaking story. It is a perfectly constructed story. And almost every single word of it is a lie. We are going to show you exactly how federal investigators dismantled that lie piece by piece using technology Brian never saw coming. And we are going to show you the 2 physical items missing from that boat that may tell the most terrifying story of all. Before we go any further, subscribe and hit that bell. This case is moving fast. You need to be here when it breaks. Lynette Hooker was not just a victim. She was a woman with a fitness routine, a social media presence, and a life she loved living on the water. 48 hours before she vanished, she posted from Guanakee, smiling, alive. When rescuers found Brian on that shore, something was wrong, something the ocean should have made impossible. The Soulmate wasn't just a boat, it was a black box, and it had been recording everything. What the machine remembered when the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service boarded the Soulmate at Fort Pierce, they wrapped it in yellow crime scene tape, and they did not touch a single thing until their forensic teams were ready. They were not looking for fingerprints. They were hunting for digital exhaust, and this boat was absolutely full of it. The first thing investigators pulled was local meteorological data from the exact night Lynette disappeared. Brian had described violent currents and blinding conditions. He said the weather made it impossible to save his wife. The radar records told a completely different story. The Sea of Abaco that night was flat calm. The water was smooth as glass, but there was one weather event that makes Brian's story fall completely apart. A localized rain pocket moved directly across the path where Brian claimed he was drifting for 9 straight hours in an open 8-foot dinghy. When rescue teams found Brian Hooker on that beach, he was completely dry. A man who drifted through open water and a direct rainstorm for 9 hours. Completely dry. He never once mentioned rain to emergency responders. Witnesses anchored 100 yards away at Aunt Pat's Bay heard something else. At 9:30 p.m., long after the anchorage had gone silent, a massive industrial splash echoed across the water. They tracked that sound directly to the Soulmate's coordinates. Someone was moving something heavy off that boat in the dark. Then came the router logs. Brian's phone and watch were automatically pinging the Soulmate's onboard Starlink satellite router deep into the night, placing his devices physically aboard while he claimed open sea drift. But the most devastating evidence came from something Brian never considered. The yacht had recently suffered a lightning strike. The entire electrical system was brand new. Factory-fresh lithium marine batteries with uncorrupted internal power logs recording every single milliamp drawn. At the exact hour Brian claimed he was shivering in a broken dinghy, someone aboard the Soulmate triggered the high-voltage water pumps, ran the interior lights, and opened the refrigerator door. Someone took a hot shower while Lynette Hooker was gone. The machine caught him. But the machine was not even the most dangerous thing Brian Hooker had forgotten about. The man who erased himself before, here is a question worth sitting with. What kind of person, the moment their wife disappears, immediately thinks about location data? The answer is the kind of person who has done this before. This is Promise 1 delivered. The digital evidence does not just prove what Brian did that night. It reveals exactly who Brian Hooker is. Public employment records pulled by investigators uncovered something that reframes this entire case. Before Brian ever set foot on the Soulmate, he was terminated from his career at AT&T. The reason was specific, documented, chilling. He had been caught illegally tampering with the GPS telematics on his corporate work van systematically, deliberately, to hide his real-time location from his employer. He believed he was a ghost. He'd been practicing becoming one for years. Now walk backward through everything you just learned and look at it through that lens. Here is what investigators are now examining in sequence. Brian personally networked the entire yacht with high-tech cameras and security systems he controlled. Brian configured the Starlink router he believed would shield his location. Brian selected a remote Bahamian anchorage with no nearby authorities. Brian constructed a weather alibi detailed enough to explain physical evidence. Brian publicly promised to never leave the island. Then fled within 48 hours. Brian boarded a late-night flight to Nassau and disappeared back into the United States. Brian left his stepdaughter, Carly, a girl he had raised since she was 3 years old, without a single word. This is Promise 2 delivered. The pattern of behavior is not coincidence. Federal investigators are not treating it as coincidence either. Carly was 3 years old when Brian became her father. He raised her. He left her behind on that island without saying goodbye. Drop a comment right now. Brian raised Carly since she was 3 years old and left without a single word to her. What does that tell you about who this man really is? The digital trail had trapped him inside that boat. But there were two things Brian could not digitally erase, and investigators believe both of them are still somewhere at the bottom of the Sea of Abaco. The last items missing from that boat were not electronic. They were physical, and they tell a story no battery log ever could. What he couldn't delete, Lynette Hooker loved staying fit on the water. She used heavy metal dumbbells on deck as part of her daily routine. The couple's own social media documented it. It was a normal, visible, consistent part of life aboard the Soulmate. When CGIS completed their inventory of the seized vessel, those dumbbells were gone, completely absent, every single one. Then investigators looked at the scuba equipment. 48 hours before Lynette disappeared, she and Brian had refilled both sets of diving tanks at Guana Key. It was routine maintenance. Both tanks topped off, both ready to dive. When federal agents boarded the Soulmate, Brian's tanks were significantly depleted. Lynette's tanks were completely full. She never got to use them. Forensic experts are now working under a specific hypothesis. The missing fitness dumbbells, combined with the absent diving weight belts, suggest a deliberate effort to ensure a body would not rise to the surface. The Sea of Abaco is deep. Weight is permanent. CGS is not investigating this case as a missing persons case. They are investigating it as a homicide at sea. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. When federal charges drop in this case, we are breaking it down the same day it happens. Brian Hooker has not been charged. Lynette Hooker has not been found. But the evidence architecture that federal prosecutors are assembling around this case is unlike anything the Coast Guard Investigative Service has built on open water. Tell me in the comments, the batteries, the dry clothes, the full scuba tanks, the missing dumbbells. Which piece of evidence do you think destroys Brian Hooker's story the most? He fooled AT&T for years. He nearly fooled the ocean. Nearly somewhere between a black box battery log and a missing set of dumbbells, the truth about what happened on the Soulmate is closing in. The ocean remembers. Before we close, come back to Lynette for a moment. Not the case, not the evidence. Her. She refilled her scuba tanks at Guana Key 48 hours before she vanished. She posted from that dock. She was smiling. She had no idea what was coming. She deserves to be found. As of today, Lynette Hooker's body has not been recovered. Brian Hooker has not been charged. The federal investigation is active, it is ongoing, and according to sources close to the case, it is accelerating. Here is what this entire case comes down to in one sentence. Brian Hooker spent years learning how to make himself invisible to every machine that tracked him. He never once considered that the ocean keeps its own records. The batteries remembered. The router remembered. The rain remembered. The witnesses at Aunt Pat's Bay remembered. And somewhere at the bottom of the Sea of Abaco, the truth is still there, waiting. What piece of evidence in this case do you think federal prosecutors lead with when charges are finally filed? Tell us below. Subscribe and hit the bell right now. When this case breaks, and it will break, you are going to want to be here. We will be here too.
For Lynette.